Please note that this episode contains depictions and stories of siblings lost by homicide, suicide, and/or domestic violence. Some people may find these stories activating, triggering, and/or disturbing. Please see our show notes for additional resources and to understand the full content of the episode.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Surviving Siblings podcast. Today I have another amazing sibling with me. Her name is Taylor. Taylor, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here today. And today we're going to be talking about your brother, Blake. So tell us a little bit about you and Blake, your childhood. Kind of tell us a little bit about your dynamic and how you guys grew up.
Yeah, so we grew up, our grandparents raised both of us. And so we had, I guess, our normal sibling relationship, your typical one, I guess you could say. We were kind of close at one point when we were younger. Blake was the popular kid, and so he had many friends everywhere. But I would say that we were close growing up. And then as we got older, we kind of departed ways. That sounds terrible, but we did.
Well, how far apart in age were you guys too? That can play a little bit of a role in that, right? As you evolve as children.
Yeah, so we were 5 years apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as you guys were growing up, when was kind of I'm sure when you were younger, you were closer, kind of talk us through your evolution as a relationship.
Yeah, so I would guess it all started maybe high school. I went to a different high school. I ended up moving in with my aunt my freshman year of high school, and that was in a different town. So we just really didn't see each other that often.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely going to impact your relationship, right? Not being in the same ecosystem like a lot of siblings are in the same high school and things like that. So I know for me personally, I can relate to that because I am 3 years older than my brother, but we actually never went to the same high school because I graduated early from high school and he didn't. So like it's an interesting dynamic. So he went to high school at the same time as my sister. So it's interesting how you have like different overlapping times and how you kind of ebb and flow. I think that's a story for a lot of siblings, right? So
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Blake. Like tell us a little bit about him in high school and who he was. He was the popular kid, you said. He played sports, I'm sure. Like tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, so he was the popular kid. Very good looking. A lot of people would say brown hair, blue eyes, and sometimes his eyes even like almost looked gray. They were so light, so very pretty. Very popular, very smart. He made good grades. People say book smart and street smart. I would say he was probably both. He played baseball and football. But baseball was his sport. He absolutely loved it. He was number 8, and he was the catcher. That was his sport. He loved that one, but he was very good at football as well. And he had scholarships to colleges for it. He ended up not going to college. He did end up losing his scholarships, but just very... that kid that everybody wanted to be friends with. And so he was just popular one.
Yeah. I mean, all of us listening to this, of course, are like envisioning that guy in high school, right? I kind of dated him. I'm not going to lie. So I'm kind of envisioning a Blake. Yeah, that was me. So I'm like, okay, yeah. So what happened with Blake? Because it sounds like he's the all-American kind of dude playing baseball, playing football, loving life. So walk us through what transpired with him and his mental health journey, because that's a big part of your story and his story, of course, Taylor.
Getting in with the wrong crowd is, I guess, mostly what happened. This was probably his junior year or senior year of high school. Just getting in with the wrong people. and he ended up going to jail. And so that's how he lost his scholarships.
That I was going to ask you, how did the scholarship loss happen? So
Yeah.
where did he have a scholarship to? We're all curious. We all want to know.
I honestly don't know. I don't remember. I was little. But he ended up going to jail. And so that's how he lost that. And then from there, it was just all downhill. He ended up being in and out of jail after that, for just different things.
What was the first initial thing that happened? Because I can relate to you, and a lot of people listening, I'm sure, can relate too, because that was my brother too. He got arrested, and it was just like, and then it kind of spiraled into this really almost habitual thing, and some of it was really stupid, and some of it was really scary. So what was that first initial thing that happened?
Yeah, the first initial thing, very, very stupid. It was actually a grand larceny, and it was over some stolen puppies.
Wow.
Yes. The full story behind all that, I don't know. I have no idea. But that is the start of it. It was, and I believe the charge was grand larceny. But him and some friends stole some puppies, and I guess the intent was to keep them and sell them.
Wow.
I don't know. But he ended up, he got out and all of that. I mean, those charges may have even been dropped. I'm not sure. And then it just, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And
when did that happen? Was that after he started getting arrested and going through some trouble? He started to get some mental health help, and this diagnosis happened.
So that was around that time, maybe after that. And mental health and all of that. I'm a mental health professional, and bipolar disorder is one that is tricky. It seems to be a trend among people. People like to say, "Oh, I'm bipolar," but people don't really realize, I guess, what that actually means. And so I would say that Blake lived his life in a manic state. Just go, 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 party, party, party. Let me see what I can do next to get away with. And so I think that's what started with the puppies. And then once he got out with that, it was the next thing. What else can I do to get away with? And so I think he lived his life in a manic state. He just was on the go all the time and wanted to see what he could do.
And it's interesting that you bring this up, and I'm so glad that we're talking about this aspect of the story and your brother, because I think you're right. It's, with TikTok, with Instagram, with, fill in the blank on the social media platforms today, right? There's so many. Everyone is like, I'm bipolar. I'm, fill in the blank. I'm depressed. I'm this, I'm that. I'm not saying they're not, but I don't know that we're getting these. I love the awareness that we're getting from mental health, but on the others, there's always good and bad with everything, right? On the other side of it, I feel like sometimes it's being thrown around a lot, I think to your point, Taylor, without actual full understanding. So it's interesting what you're saying about manic, because my brother was bipolar too. And so it's interesting. Everyone that comes on the show, I connect with them in some way. And so, yes, like I definitely connect with you. And my brother had one of the biggest red flags was, I have to share this with you and everyone else, because this is bringing something up for me. So I appreciate you holding space for this, Taylor. But one of the big moments, I think it was just a few years before my brother, probably 2 years before he was killed. And he was finally kind of becoming a little self-aware about his bipolar, and, I remember him telling my mom, like, I have such extreme highs and such extreme lows. Like, the lows are so low. And he did. Like, he lived in a lot of, like, manic episodes, too. And so my question to you, Taylor, is, like, reflecting back on that and seeing that that's a whole lot. But for those people that don't understand bipolar, if we could just kind of touch on that just for a minute. Because I think a lot of people think it looks a certain way, right? Like, you're just erratic, you're all over the place. And it can look like that, but not everybody looks like that. So, someone like your brother who's living in a manic state consistently, because I feel like my brother did very similar things, always chasing the next high. There was a lot of these things. Is that kind of what Blake was like too? And can you kind of describe what that means to live in a manic state? Because I don't know that everybody understands what that means. Yeah.
Yeah. So mania for anybody can look different, For Blake specifically, I think, and to kind of backtrack a little bit, I think we didn't really realize it until after high school because sports was that thing for him. And so that was that thing kind of for him to get that activity out, I guess.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you feeling lost in your grief journey? Perhaps even stuck? As a surviving sibling, I too have felt lost, stuck, confused, angry. Well, fill in the blank. I've felt so many emotions along my grief journey. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about too. Along the way, I found that what I needed was answers to all of my unanswered questions, validation, permission to feel everything that I was feeling at different times, and ultimately, I needed guidance. That's why I created the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. This is a 23-page guide that guides you, the surviving sibling, along your grief journey. Written and created by a surviving sibling for surviving siblings. Click the link in the show notes to get your copy or visit thesurvivingsiblings.com, where you can also find more show information, merchandise for surviving siblings like you, and more resources and support.
And so, like I was saying, it was just kind of that next thing, like, what can I do? So, the sports, and then it was stealing the dogs, and then it was maybe the next thing, like marijuana. And I know a lot of people don't look at that as a drug, but some people do. Alcohol, maybe next. Partying next. He was always partying. He loved it. He loved that life. And then ultimately, leading up to his death, we ended up with meth. Was, I guess, that next thing. But for him, it was just, I don't want to say hyper, because he wasn't hyper all over the place, but maybe a little. Sometimes it came with anger. We never knew what he was going to say. We never knew what he was going to do. And so I think he just kind of lived like that. We never knew what was going to be next for him. And I do believe at some points, I think he may have used that to his advantage. I definitely do think that.
What do you mean by that? That's interesting, because I'm connecting a lot with what you're saying. And I think a lot of people who have siblings or, have siblings that have passed that struggle with mental health are going to relate to what you're saying. What do you mean by that?
Maybe a little manipulative.
Yep.
And man, he had my grandma wrapped around his finger, and he could say anything he wanted to, and he was going to get it from her. And I mean, he could just be off the wall, cussing, going crazy, and then want something. And he knew how to flip a switch and would just, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, to get his way.
Mm-hmm. Sounds familiar. Yep. I think that's something that is important too, just as we're diving into all of this about your story and just sibling loss stories in general, is that, we want to obviously humanize and remember those that we've lost in a beautiful way, but it's also okay to talk about the things that they made mistakes, they did things wrong, they weren't perfect. And I think that's refreshing when we're open and honest about that. And I try to be as open and honest about that as possible while respecting my brother, right? But there were a lot of things like that in my situation too, Taylor. And it was mostly with my mother, and he would do similar things like that too. And it was just like, oh my, it was like watching an extreme like roller coaster ride, or one of those like up and down rides where it was like where you get dropped really fast and then you go up kind of slow and then you go. I mean, it was like, it was, you know, it would shake me up. It was like a rug being pulled out from underneath you. And to your point, not everyone with bipolar operates that way. There's so many different types of, you know, bipolar and things, there's people that you might know in your life and they have bipolar and they're not like that. This is more of a manic type of state. And so it's interesting. I actually didn't know we had this in common. And so I'm like, wow. But yeah, it's really interesting to watch, and sometimes quite frustrating because you watch them hurt some people that you really love.
But yeah, and then like you were saying with your brother, you know, the highs are very high, lows very low, which ultimately, you know, led to his suicide.
Right. So he loses the scholarship. He's getting arrested. He's partying. Talk us through how we're kind of leading up to, unfortunately, his death by suicide, because he's struggling with mental health issues. Is he taking medication? Is he going to therapy? Like, kind of walk us through that, because he was 23, right? So tell us a little bit about everything leading up to that point.
Yeah, so he did seek out some help for a little bit. He stopped taking his medicine because it made him feel sad, is what he said. That was his reasoning. And, you know, and you've been very open about taking medicine, and I have as well. You've got to find the right kind, the right brand, the right dose, all of that. But he was just unwilling to do that because, you know, he lived in this manic state on this go, 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 go. His medicine brought him down, and he didn't want to feel that. And so I guess, whereas that would feel normal to me or you, it was not normal to him. So because he was down. So he wouldn't take them. And then he ended up self-medicating with meth and maybe a little alcohol. And so he never sought out therapy that I'm aware of. That was just not a cool thing to do. You know, you've got to remember, he's the popular kid. The popular kid doesn't seek out therapy, doesn't take medication and things like that. Which, looking back now, I wish I knew all of this. You know, I was so young at the time. I wish I knew all this, and I wish I knew what I know now. Like, let me help you. There's just such this stigma around therapy and around taking medication, and there shouldn't be.
Yeah, there shouldn't be. And, you know, I love how you described that and explained that, because you're right. When someone's really used to this or in a manic state, and like, I'm not a therapist, but, you know, again, just listening to so many stories and sharing it and going through this experience myself with my brother, when they're used to that, we don't want to not feel that anymore. And so maybe feeling like we do, like even keeled every day, can feel depressing to them, to your point, right? And I think we can all think about, you know, that kind of Blake guy in our high school. And if, you know, there would be stigma like, oh, he's taking medication. Like, what's wrong with him? What's going on with him? So I can understand why he would not want that, because my brother was the same way. He didn't want anything to do with that. But, oh, drugs? We'll go there. Sure. Yeah, no problem. It's frustrating.
It's very frustrating. But that just seems to be the fun thing to do, the cool thing to do, or the right thing to do in their mind.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's interesting that the drugs that they choose as well, because of that, like that high and that feeling that they need. So that's a whole other episode, but I think it's important to talk about, right? So he's really struggling, battling with this. So he didn't go off to college, Taylor, or what happened after? Yeah. So he's got this awesome like baseball and football career, and he doesn't even tap into that. So what happens after high school?
Right. So he started working. He was working at a plant near where we lived at the time, where he lived. And then I'm in high school. Really, this is when things really, really get bad and start going downhill. While he was at that job, he broke his ankle, and so he had to be out of work for a while. And, now that I'm saying this, it makes me wonder if maybe that kind of started the drug use as well, because surely the doctor put him on something for pain when he broke his ankle. And he had to have surgery and had screws put in his ankle and stuff. I mean, I think a forklift ran it over and crushed his ankle. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, so that put him out of work for a while. And then after that, he just didn't go back. He stayed with my grandma. And, he may do like odd jobs here and there. He was very well, he could work on cars. That was actually something he learned in high school at the Career Center. He would, the automotive class, that's what it was. And so
did you guys have like shop? Because we had shop where you could like go take, yeah. That's so cool. Yeah.
So we called it the Career Center. And so they would actually put us on a bus and take us to a different place.
That's cool.
And then back for classes. And so he took automotive. And so he learned a lot there, and he could work on cars. He actually had one, and he kind of put a new motor in it and kind of rebuilt all of that himself. And so he could do odd stuff like that. I was in a different town. I really don't know what took place during that time. I do know this is when he started being in and out of jail for different things. He was always caught speeding, so he got his driver's license taken away, and then didn't have a car. And so he would drive with no license and just get arrested for that, stupid things like that he could have prevented, but didn't want to, I guess. Driving with no license, or would get caught with marijuana, or get caught with drug paraphernalia is what they would call it.
Right, like it was escalating the things that he was getting caught with and getting in trouble. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was. It was escalating, and this is kind of leading up to, but the last thing, well, not the last thing, but the biggest thing he did end up get arrested for, was breaking and entering and kidnapping.
Wow.
So it very much escalated.
Yeah.
And
that's huge. That's a big one. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it started off with stealing some puppies.
Uh-huh.
And so it was just little things, and then this huge one.
Uh-huh.
So he actually ended up spending a year in jail. And that was a whole thing that we don't really need to get into, charges wise and all of that. But he got caught in another state. He had fled. Got caught in another state, so they ended up transporting him around, and he had warrants in other city or other counties, and things like that. So he ended up spending a year in jail, just being transported back and forth between jails. So during that time, he got clean because, he was
right
for a while. So he got clean.
And do you have contact with him during that time, Taylor? Because you're still in high school. So how was your relationship during that time? Would you guys speak? Would you email? Like, how was that dynamic?
Yeah, so he would call me. You got to pay for those phone calls. But he would call me. We would talk about every day. Because, it's funny. He would call my grandma, and then he'd call me. We were the two. We had contact. But yeah, he would call me every day, sometimes more than once a day, just to talk to me while he was in there. We'd send him money and things like that while he was in there. So we did have contact while he was there.
Yeah. Do you feel like that was a good time even though it was a dark time for him, it was right? Like, there's always a silver lining with things, right? Like, he was getting clean. But do you feel like it was a good time for you guys to kind of connect, and like he kind of needed to get clean, but also cultivate a relationship again with you, I feel like, during that?
I do. I think it was a good thing for him and for me. and maybe even for my grandma, even though she would never admit that.
Yeah.
Because
Sorry, Grams. Sorry, Grams. But it
Right.
was probably good. Yeah. Well,
probably
because she
was.
knew, let's face it, she knew where he was. That's a whole other
Right.
thing.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
Right. So we knew where he was at. We knew he was alive.
Yep.
As scary and as sad as that sounds, we knew he was alive.
No, I
We
connect
knew
with
where
that.
he was at.
Mhm.
He, he had shelter. He had food. I don't know. He may have even made some friends in there. I don't know.
Sure.
And so while he may not have liked it, he sounded great. He sounded so good. He sounded like his old self, I guess. His pre-drugs self.
Right.
You could tell he was clean. We would always joke because he would just sit in there and just drink black coffee. And we would just laugh about that because he is not a coffee drinker. But here he is just sitting in jail drinking black coffee out of a cup. And we just thought that was funny. It was just, I don't know, it was just one of those things.
Yeah.
And so he was good. He was good. He sounded good. He looked good. Once they transported him back to the town that we were in, we would go visit him like once a week. I think there may have been like a limit on it. And there was a limit on how many people could go in there
Of course.
and who could go in there and things like that. But we would go visit him and he looked so good. He looked like himself. He gained weight. The drugs and all made him lose weight. He was just super skinny and, he's always looked good, but he just looked good and he sounded good and he gained weight. And I think that he knew that. I think that he may have felt good, because he was clean.
So that is going on. And that, I mean, even though it's a horrible situation, nobody wants to experience that. Sometimes we get put in those situations because we need a wake-up call a little bit, right? And so walk us through, he gets out, and what year are we in when he gets out of jail?
Oh, jeez. I'm sorry, I have to think. The timelines and stuff like that just get away.
It's the grief timeline. It's hard, right?
It
Looking
is.
back on it, yeah.
I was still in high school, I think. I graduated in 2017. So maybe 2015, 2016, somewhere in here.
So tell us what happens. What happens when he gets out? He's in a better state. Like, did he have goals and plans and things he wanted to do? And then what actually happened, right?
I remember, it's funny, it's all coming back to me now. I remember, like, we had breakfast at, like, Burger King. And then went to church. And, so he was clean and doing good, living with his girlfriend at the time. I don't really know where he was working at. But he just seemed well.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure. This is where things kind of get confusing, I guess. I'm not really sure after that where the turn went.
Did you guys kind of lose contact? What were some of the kind of, as I like to call them, right, red flags that started to happen in the change? Because this is such a strong way for him to kind of turn his life around. And then what were some red flags that you saw? Like, I would assume you didn't have contact anymore, right?
Yeah, so we did have a limited contact. I guess it was mostly because he didn't have the driver's license, didn't have a car. He was stuck in one spot. And so I guess that's kind of the turning point in what led him back to his old ways, because he was stuck in the house and couldn't go anywhere. He did come to my high school graduation, which is something that I cherish now, because it was, all during that time when he was still looking good, still feeling good. So he did come to my high school graduation. And then, but I think by this point, the drugs and all of that were slowly starting to take back over.
Yeah. And so you graduated in 2017. So from that time until his death, because he died in August of 2018, kind of walk us through what happened, like what transpired, what you know, and then of course we're going to talk about his passing by suicide, of course.
Okay. So I was in college, and so, when you go off to college, you're away and isolated from everyone, it seems like.
And it's a new experience. You're living your life. Yeah.
Fun. It's fun. And so at this point, we did kind of lose contact. We've lost contact. I'm in college. So my whole freshman year of college, I don't know what's going on. I'm in school. I'm hanging out with friends that I've just made. I'm having a good time. Truthfully, I don't know what's going on with him. Well, then I go home. So this was fall of 2017. So if we fast forward to springtime, summertime of 2018, I guess is when all of this started. So I'm back home now for the summer. So the spring semester is let out. I go back home, and this is when I find out all of this stuff. That he's not well. Super depressed. There's been the relationship that he was in is very toxic. It's getting worse, mostly because of the drug use. And, if you do know anything about bipolar disorder and meth use, they do not mix well at all.
Oh, no, not a good mixture. No.
And so...
Can you tell us, just to pause here for a second, Taylor, Can you tell us a little bit about why? Because I love bringing awareness to mental health and drug addiction, just all these different things that can contribute to these horrible things that do happen. Can you tell us just in a real quick snippet, because I know this is your area of expertise too, is mental health, and this is a passion for you. Tell us why that doesn't mix. No one should be doing meth, but when you have a mental health, diagnosis or issue, it's going to exacerbate a lot of things. Can you share a little bit about what happens for someone doing meth that has bipolar? Because it's very serious.
Yeah. Now, I do want to say I'm in no way a doctor. So I'm not a doctor at all.
I always disclaim that too. I'm like, I just have experiences. Yes. But right. I do want to hear your opinion on this though, because this is something that you went through. Yeah.
Well, when you start to look at the brain and the chemical makeup of it, you have your dopamine levels, your serotonin levels, and when you have bipolar disorder, those levels are off. Well, when you're doing drugs, it's throwing your levels off as well. And so that's why you take medicine, is it will level them out. And so he's not taking the medicine, he's taking drugs, which is throwing them off. That's kind of how I've looked at it, and that's how it's been explained to me. It's all on a level, and they're off balance basically.
Right. Yeah. No. Thanks for sharing that, because I just think it's really important that we always kind of pause on those things and talk on that for a minute, because I watched it with my own brother, and that's something both of my parents were in complete denial about it, and still to this day I think it's a little bit of a battle with them, but it doesn't matter because he's not here anymore. But it matters in me sharing stories and connecting with all of you, because I would instantly know when my brother was using, or when he was doing, any substance really, but I could start to tell the different. I'm sure you went through this too. I could be like, I think he's doing that, because there were different reactions and different things happening. And you're right. It's because they already have chemical imbalances, and then they're adding something on that's, exasperating it even more. So
usually, like alcohol, and I believe meth as well, they're depressants. And so that would be another thing, to throw everything off, is it's a depressant and you're already depressed.
Right. It's very, and which is confusing, because you see them kind of go through these big highs, but that doesn't mean that's actually how they're feeling inside. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. So you're there over the summer, and you're hearing about all of this, and you're like, what the heck is going on with Blake? Right. You're like,
right. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe it was because I was at school, he didn't want to bother me, maybe, because right. We didn't really talk that much. I didn't know anything was going on. And then it was once I got home that summer, And I'm still living with my aunt, so we're in different households, me and my brother.
Right.
But we're closer, distance-wise. And so he starts calling me, and he's like, some of the phone calls they get worse and worse as time goes on, but he would just call me and be like, hey, how are you doing? What are you doing? Can you come get me? Can you take me to do this? Can you take me to do that? So mostly that's what they were. It's like, hey, can you come get me? Let's go do something. Get me out of the house. I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's go. Well, this is when I start finding out about the toxic relationship and stuff. So the girlfriend at the time was really his transportation to go anywhere, to do anything. And, he would take her car, and which it's not right. But he would take her car and stuff like that. And so I guess she was kind of getting, fed up with him.
Sure.
So he would call me, and that's fine. Like, I don't mind taking him somewhere, but it slowly became, let's go find her. Let's go see where she's at. I want to catch her where she's at. And so it kind of became more from a, hey, what are you doing? Let's go do something, to a, let's go see where my girlfriend's at.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a manipulative thing.
You feel like he had ulterior motives, right, to hang out with you, and you're like, what the heck? I just want to hang out with my brother, right?
Right. And so, but previously I didn't know anything was wrong. So anyway, I went and got him one day. I took him over there. I didn't know anything was wrong. Me and her were friends. Previously, before college, me and her would go hang out. So we were friends. I had no idea anything was wrong until, he would also like want to use my phone to text her and stuff like that. And so that's how I found out, what was going on, because I had texted her and I was like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, why won't you call Blake back or whatever? And so she sends me this long paragraph and explains everything in there. I ended up deleting the message and told Blake that she never texted me back, because I did not want to fuel the fire. I had no idea what I would open up if he known that.
Right. Right.
So it just kind of became a summer of that. And then it kind of came down to, I don't feel like living anymore. I didn't really know much about mental health at the time. I had went into school for education. I was going to teach early childhood elementary education. That is what I went to school for. My freshman year, that's what I started. And so
I could so see you doing that, by the way, just your personality. Like, and I mean that in the sweetest way, because you're just so sweet. And I could see you doing that. Just had to say that, because I get that vibe from you. Like, you're so sweet and patient. So yeah, so you're not even in that mindset, but he's vocalizing this to you. He's saying, I don't want to live anymore. I can't take this anymore. Like, he's saying this to you. Wow.
Oh, actually, let me backtrack for a minute here.
Yeah.
I had went into school for education sometime in the middle of that semester, and this was like my first or second semester of college ever. I changed my major actually to human services. And
interesting.
At the time, I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing this?
Wow.
But I had a friend, my friend Kara, she, and we'll talk more about her later, but she kind of supported me in that. She was a human services major. And she was like, I love it. I have a great mentor from this department, Miss Williams, and she became a good mentor to me as well. But anyway, I talked to Kara about it, and then I was like, I don't know. So I went and talked to Miss Williams about it, who was the chair of the social sciences division at school. And she kind of helped me. She was like, well, this is what you can do. And man, if you knew Miss Williams, everybody needs to know her. But she kind of helped me and was like, I don't want to persuade you over to our department, but let me persuade you over to our department type of thing. So anyway,
it takes a good mentor. Like, it really does. I think, and this is, all through all the chapters in your life, right? So, I think and there's a reason that you connected with her, right? I mean, like I'm sure she's an amazing person, but not every single person in the world connects with her. Not every single person in the world connects with me or you, right? So it's meant to be. When you connect with people, it's, they're supposed to guide you to either the next step or a couple chapters, whatever. They play a role in your story. So it's meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and she definitely did. And we connected, we clicked, and I changed my major. She told me to take a few days to think about it, but I didn't. I went back to my dorm. I went into my little Canva thing, whatever it was, and changed it. But she had to approve it. But I sure did not take the few days like she told me to. I went in there. I was like, no, I'm doing this.
You knew. But how interesting is that this is before? Like, how interesting. Wow.
Exactly. And I had no idea why I was doing this. And so I had taken a couple of classes because of that, like sociology, psychology classes, things like that. So I was learning a little bit, but I still didn't really know, you can have all the knowledge in the world. This is what I tell people. You can have all the knowledge, but when it's happening to you, it's like you just forget everything. Or that's how it was for me anyway.
I agree. I think so many people will relate to that, Taylor. I agree. It is totally different when it happens to you.
Right.
Totally
it's
different.
It's not a textbook anymore.
No.
And so fast forwarding back, Blake tells me, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to live. He starts telling me that he wants to kill himself. He tells me how he's going to do it. Very, very graphic. And I don't know how graphic I can be.
Just you can tell us as much as you want. Yeah.
Tell me, like, I'm going to hang myself.
Wow, he's telling, and you're 18 at the time, Taylor, right? You're so young. Yeah.
And he was 23, so he's young as well.
Yeah.
And so he would just straight tell me, I'm going to hang myself. And I'm like,
that was oddly specific too.
Very specific. And that was one thing that I questioned later. But, that's besides the point now. But, and I remember he called me over there one day, and he would call me like in the middle of the night, like 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and say like, hey, you need to come over here. Well, of course I'd go, because I'm like, I didn't know what I was going to walk into, but of course I'd go, because I'm going to do what I can to keep him from doing that.
Right.
And so I got over there one day, and he's laying in the bed, and, which previously is weird. Like, you don't just lay in the bed. But he's laying in the bed, and I see in the living room, and this is my brother's house, my mom's house, the ceiling fan in the living room is down. Like, it's not up there.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. And if you knew my brother, he's always taking things apart and things like that. So I'm thinking,
it's like the mechanic in him, right? The car mechanic in him, yeah.
Bored and wanted to see if he could take it down and put it back together. I don't know. So I asked my mom, I'm like, what's going on here? And she's like, shh, like, she kind of blows me off. And I guess she didn't want Blake to hear me asking that, I guess. So I'm like, okay. So I go in there to the room where Blake's at. He's laying in the bed, and I'm just like sitting there beside him, trying to talk to him because, I know he's depressed. I know he's wanting to kill himself. He had told me. So I'm talking to him, trying to figure out what's going on. And he tells me he had heard me ask the question about the fan. And he tells me that he tried to hang himself from it. And this is terrible, but when he told me that, I kind of laughed. And
you didn't really know how to react, I'm sure, right? Like,
know what to say. And I didn't like cackle, laugh. I just kind of,
like you nervous laugh, kind of like, are you serious?
Right.
Is this for real? Are you joking with me? Like,
right.
It's a reaction that we have sometimes as humans, right?
Right. Yep. And so it was a reaction I had. I just kind of laughed, and it was just kind of left at that. I really don't think we said much anything after that. So I ended up we wrapped things up. We didn't really talk much anymore. I go back home. And so it was kind of turning into like an everyday thing where he was, or in the middle of the night type of thing. to call me and say, hey, you need to come over here or whatever. And then there was another time I went over, and he was mad. He was mad because I was supposed to bring him a lighter and I didn't bring it. And that sounds like such a stupid thing to be mad about, but when you're in that mindset and you're in that state, maybe a cigarette is all he needed to help himself a little bit.
Right.
And I didn't bring water, so of course he was mad. And so he gets mad, and I think this was like a 12 o'clock in the morning type of deal. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, I'm not going to find you a lighter right now.
Right.
It's in the middle of the night. And he was like, well, you can leave. I just called you over here to tell you bye anyway. And I'm like, these are not things that my brother would have said previously to me. My brother loved me, and I know that. And I knew that, and I know that today. He loved me, and I loved him, and I think he knew that I loved him. And I like to think that he did. And so, but in the moment...
Of course he did, Taylor, because why were you the person that he was calling every single
Right.
time something? So, yes, you know it in your heart. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, so, in the moment, though, I'm like, to me like
Of course.
this. Why do you want to hurt me? But at the same time...
Because he was hurting, right?
He was hurting. He was hurting, and that was the only way that was the only thing he knew, was let me call my sister because I know she's gonna come. And gosh, that is so... makes me sad. It does. But I'm glad that he knew I would come, that he could call me. And so that's what he told me, you can go on home. I only called you over here to tell you bye anyway. And I don't even know what day this was. Well, I ended up going, I went back home, a few days passed, whatever. And he's still alive at this point. I'm talking to my aunt about this. This is not the aunt that I live with. This is my other aunt. And these are my mom's sisters. But I was talking to her about it. I'm like, look, we've got to do something. Like, I don't know where to start. I have never dealt with this before. I'm
18 years old. I'm in college. I'm going into my sophomore year. Somebody help me with this. Yeah, I get it. Mm-hmm.
What do I do? How can I help my brother? Where do we start? And so she's like, okay, let's figure this out. So she's like, we can call, the local mental health center, ask them what to do. And I believe that this day was on a Friday, because we were planning to call them Monday. So, because they were not going to be open. So it had to have been Friday. She's like, that's where we need to start. Let's call the local mental health center, ask them what we need to do. He's telling me not only is he telling me he's going to kill himself, he's telling me how he's going to do it. He's already attempted to do it. In the living room, there was another cord hanging in our shop behind the house. So there was a second attempt at some point, because I saw it, and to be completely honest with you, it may still be there.
Wow.
But in the shop behind our house, there's a cord hanging down, and there's something up under it for him to stand on. And, thinking about that now, I'd actually forgotten about that part. It just now came back to me. I can actually still picture it. And like I said, it may still be there. I don't know. So anyways, we're like, well, let's call the mental health center on Monday. Let's see if we can get him involuntarily committed, which would be, committing someone to the hospital against their will. You could have an officer or ambulance come pick them up. They're not going to go to jail. It may scare them because they may think that, but they're not going to go to jail. They're going to go to the hospital and be monitored for a few days.
Right.
That was the plan. That's what we were going to do. I just had to get my grandma on board with it, because my grandma's the one, she raised us, all of that type of thing. So I'm telling her our plans, and I got her on board. Something had clicked, and she was like, yep, let's do it then. So the plan was to go Monday. He got arrested. So that threw all of that plan away. At the time, we would have thought that would have made it easier, him being in jail. But it didn't. It made things harder. And so he's now in jail for trespassing. And, he's supposed to have like a court hearing. We go in there, we're talking to the judge, and here I am, my 18-year-old self, talking to a judge in a courtroom, saying, hey, my brother has expressed to me that he's suicidal. Not only has he expressed to me that he wants to kill himself, he has told me how to do it, and he has tried to do it. What can you do?
Right.
He tells me there's nothing he can do.
Right.
And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, well, you're a judge. You can do what you want to do. But he tells me there's nothing he can do and that we need to go talk to the mental health center. So that's what we do. We leave straight from there. When we go to the mental health center, we're like, look, this is what's happened. He's now in jail. This is what the judge told us. Now we're here. What can you do? Their response was that they couldn't do anything either because he was already in state custody.
How powerless did you guys feel? I mean, just...
So powerless. So helpless.
Yeah.
And this is something that has made me think, since then, no wonder people don't go get help. It's hard to find it. And so, especially for, the county that we were in, which, we won't really go there either, but I'm like, this should be easy. He's in state custody. Take him to the hospital. And so their reasoning was, if we were to involuntarily commit him, he would be in state custody. Since he's in jail, he's already in state custody. So if he were to attempt something in jail, it is their responsibility to take the proper measures there and get him to the hospital. So he would have had to attempt to kill himself in jail before they would have done something.
Which, you listen to that and you're like, okay, I can see your, black and white reasoning, but when you actually have all the facts and you understand what's been going on, so we're going to wait till it's too late, basically, is what you're telling us. That's really what's going on here. Yeah.
And that's what it seemed like, and, now fast forward and I've worked in mental health and stuff, I can see it. I can understand their reasoning, but in the moment, it's like, I am telling you that this is what he said. I feel like it should be easier, and it's not. So we leave there. We go back to the jail because he hadn't had his hearing yet, but we were able to talk to the judge the first time. We go back for the actual hearing, and I'm telling him again, I'm like, look, they're telling me they can't do anything. I need you to do something. And so, I was very angry with them, with the jail, the courts, the mental health center. I was very angry with them. But to the judge's credit, he did bring it up to Blake during the hearing. He was like, look, you don't need to be trespassing. He was like, do you have something? And I guess the way he kind of worded it, unless you have a mental disorder, you have something wrong with you that we need to figure out. I really don't remember the exact words that were said, but I will give him credit for that. He did bring it up to Blake.
At least it was acknowledged. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It was acknowledged. So anyway, I believe that was Monday. Let's see. That was Monday. He spent a few days in there. My grandma, anytime he'd go to jail before and could be bonded out, my grandma would bond him out. I don't know why. We would always tell her not to because he had her wrapped around his finger, like I had mentioned previously. And so this time, I'm like, look, do not go get him out. Okay. He's already told us all of these things. This is the best place for him to be, other than a hospital, but this is the best we can do. Leave him in there. A bond for trespassing was only $70. So my grandma gets him out. And she got him out. We told her not to. She did it anyway because he sounded so pitiful on the phone and sad. And he did. I felt bad for him. I did. Because he would, we'd talk on the phone and he just sounded bad. He didn't sound good. You could tell he didn't want to be in there. You could almost hear it in his voice. He just didn't want to be alive. You could hear it. And I guess anybody who's experienced a suicide or someone who has told them that they don't want to live anymore, you can just hear their voice change.
Right.
And, and I felt bad. Like, of course I'd want to go get him. But why would I when he's in the safest place he could be? So anyways, my grandma ended up bonding him out. Well, that was a few days later, that same week. Friday came around that same week. Friday came around and he calls me and he's at his cousin's house because that's where he felt safe. And during the process of all this, me and that cousin became very close. And she's actually someone that I didn't know her. And I guess I forgot to mention too, so we have different dads, but he didn't know his real dad until later in life. And so that was the cousin on that side. So that's why I didn't know her.
A lot of family dynamics in your story.
A lot of family dynamics. And so that's why I didn't know this cousin, because it was Blake's dad's cousin.
Right.
But me and her ended up becoming close, even though she's like my mom's age. And so he ended up over there some kind of way, and that's where he felt safe. And so he calls me from her house and is like, hey, you're going back to school tomorrow, which would be Saturday, August 18th. I'm going back to school. I'm moving in for my sophomore year. He calls me that Friday the 17th and says, hey, you're going back to school tomorrow. Let's go hang out. And he sounds good. He sounds great. He was manic. He was back up here, back on his high, ready to go. And I'm like, okay. I'm a little confused because you didn't sound like this 2 days ago, but okay, sure. He's like, come get me. Let's go hang out. You're going back to school. I'm not going to get to see you for a while. Let's go get something to eat. I'm ready to see you, that type of thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. I'm going to get dressed. I'm going to come get you. And so that's what I do. I get dressed. I come up there to his cousin's house. I get him. And it was just great. It was a good day. This was Friday, August 17th, 2018. And we just have a good day. We've got to get up super early Saturday morning because it's move-in day. Well, this is the day that he hung himself. And so it, I guess, kind of gets a little bit darker. I'm at school, moving in. My fiance at the time, my now husband, he was with me. We're all moving in. My friend Kara's there because she also went to school there. We're just all here. We're moving in. And for some reason, unbeknownst to me at the time, I didn't unpack my bag. And I'm like, I'm too overwhelmed. I don't want to unpack. I just want to go hang out with Kara. I want to go see my other friends. Like, I don't want to pack right now. There's too much going on. Let me unpack later when everybody leaves and things have settled. So I didn't unpack. And I go over to Colby. We go to Walmart. Some kind of way we end up at Walmart to get some things. And on the way back from Walmart, I get a phone call. And it's the dreaded phone call. The one that you don't.
Yeah. And none of us forget. Yeah.
The one that you don't want to get. And when you do get it, you never forget it. And it's from Daquan, who was my brother's friend. They were best friends growing up and throughout school. Daquan was a little bit older than Blake. But, you know, that didn't matter. Like, they were friends. And I've always said that he was my brother as well because they were so close. And I'm like, okay, you're my brother too. And so Daquan is the one who calls me. And I didn't think anything of it at first because I'm like, you know, I thought of him as my brother.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, he knows that I'm moving into school. Maybe he's just calling me to chat about that. And I answer the phone and he's crying. Already crying when he answers the phone. And I'm like, Daquan, what's wrong? And he goes, please tell me it's not true. And those were the only words that he could get out. I think he was so distraught, he couldn't get anything else out either. Like,
how did he know, Taylor? I'm so like, how did he find out?
So that's
this is the first person to call you. That's crazy.
And that's kind of unraveling. And honestly, it's still a little unknown. He says that to me and I say, what are you talking about? And he goes, please tell me it's not true. Blake's dead. I don't know how he knew. I hung up on him because I'm like, well, now I've got to figure out what's going on. So I called the cousin that Blake was staying with.
Yeah.
I called her. She answers the phone and she's already crying. She answers the phone and I'm like, okay, you don't even have to tell me because now I know. Now, how she already knew as well is still unknown. So we didn't even talk. Like, she answered the phone, she was crying, I hung up. Like, we didn't even talk because I already knew. I called my grandma and I'm like, look, this is what I've just been told. I said, you need to go figure out what's going on because I'm not there. I'm at school. And Colby, we were on the way back from Walmart. He hears my phone call with Daquan, so he pulls over into a parking lot and just kind of sitting there because he, I guess, heard the phone call but didn't really know what was going on. Well, so we're sitting there in that parking lot. I told Colby, I'm like, you need to take me home. And it's not funny, but, you know, for lack of a better word, it's funny. It never occurred to me that I could drive myself home.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
And, you know, like, I have a car.
Mm-hmm.
It never occurred to me. And so I'm yelling at Colby. I'm like, you need to take me home. He's like, I'm not taking you. He's very rational. He's still like this. He's very rational. He wants to think about things before we do it. And he's like, I'm not taking you home. He's like, we don't even know what's going on. Let's find out what's going on first. And then we can talk about you going home. I'm like, okay, whatever. So we get back on campus. I called my friend Kara and I said, look, this is what I think's going on. I was like, I don't know what to do. She said, well, just come to my room, my apartment, which was on campus apartments. And she's like, just come over here and just kind of sit over here until we figure out more. So, you know, from that time, we get back on campus and I just go sit in Kara's bedroom floor.
And it feels like a million years are going by. It's like, oh my God, every minute is a year at that point. Yeah.
A million years are going by. You're so alone, but there's so many people around. And so I'm literally just sitting in her bedroom floor. And she hadn't come in there yet because she was still out in the parking lot talking to Colby, trying to figure out what's going on. And so in the meantime, her boyfriend at the time, his mom hears what's happening. And she comes in there and she sits in the floor with me. And I just can't, you know, thank her enough for that. This is someone who I barely know. She just came and sat in the floor with me and she hugged me and she prayed with me. And that's something that meant a lot to me because, you know, I was raised in church and I felt so alone. I'm sitting in a floor by myself. So I am alone. Like, no one else is in there with me. And she sees that and she hears what's going on. She sat in the floor with me. She hugged me. She prayed with me. And she got up and walked out. Like, she knew she didn't have to say anything. I guess she knew there was nothing she could say.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there and waiting, and then finally Kara comes in, and by this time, in between all this time, from the parking lot, from Walmart to back to campus, I have people texting me, telling me, like, hey, what's going on? Like, I heard this, I heard that. Still to this day, it's unclear how it got all around.
Wow. That's tough. Yeah.
It's tough because I had people messaging me about the situation.
And you're like, how do you even know? Like,
before I even knew about the situation.
Yeah.
And what was going on. And still, it's never registered to me that I could get into my own car and I could drive myself home. It never picked
trauma response, right? It was, and also being so young and you're at college. But who told you what happened to Blake, though? How did you find that out? Yeah.
Well, it's my aunt texts me. She's like, hey, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. That's all I said. She said, do you want me to come get you? And I said, yes, please. And that's all I said. And this was in text message. I'm like, yes, please. And she's like, okay, I'm on the way. So I guess my grandma had called her. So as far as my grandma and all them getting all of that figured out, I don't know because I wasn't there. But my aunt comes and picks me up. She takes me back to her house because she didn't want to take me down to my mom's house yet because we still kind of wasn't sure. And I just remember the car ride from her picking me up and driving to her house was so quiet. We didn't say a word to each other. It was so quiet. And I just went, when we got in her house, I went to her extra bedroom and just laid in the bed and just stared at the wall. And it's funny because I remember listening to your story. You sat on your couch and stared at a wall. And I think
it's a real thing. People are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, until you've experienced it, it's a thing. Like, It's a thing. Yeah.
You don't know. It doesn't make sense. But if you're doing it, you just got to be, you got to be in that situation. I don't want anyone in that situation, but you've got to be in that situation to know what it means. And so I'm just laid there staring at the wall. And her daughter comes in and she tells her what's going on. Because at one point they were all close. So she comes in there, she lays with me, she puts her arm around me, and we just laid there and cried. And so finally, my aunt tells me, she's like, we've got to go to the house. This was, I guess, an hour, a few hours had passed. It's like, we got to go to the house. At some point during all this, we had gotten the confirmation, he did hang himself. It was in the junkyard near his house, and he was dead. Some point, and I don't really remember it all. To be completely honest with you, I don't remember it. But at some point during all this, we had gotten that confirmation.
But how tough is that, Taylor? Because he had made attempts already and he had told you, and now it's really happened. Like,
yeah,
that must have been so difficult for you. And just, I can't imagine. Like,
well,
wow.
And then, and going from the day before when he was just in this great mood and was doing great and was just all over the place.
What a high to a low. Like,
right, exactly. And that's
extreme.
It was so extreme. And so we get to my grandma, my mom, my brother's house, and people were starting to gather at this point, because it had been a few hours, word had gotten out, family was coming over, friends had heard and were coming over. And so word had started getting out. Well, I knew I didn't want to talk to anybody except Daquan because that was my brother. And
he's the one that called you, too.
He's the one who called me. Yeah. And so I don't believe I said a word to anybody. I think I just got there and waited on Daquan to get there. And so Daquan, my grandma, and then another cousin, Kelly, they wasn't there when we got there because they had actually went to the hospital to ID the body. And so, and it means a lot to me that Daquan stepped up to go do that as well. Because, that's traumatizing for one, but he had really, no blood connection, I guess. Like, he didn't have to do that, but he was like, no, I'm going with your grandma to, see what's going on. So I'm waiting for them. They finally get there after what seems like forever waiting on them. They finally get there. And all the words that I could say to Daquan was, I was waiting for you to get here. Like, that's what I said. I was like, I have been waiting on you. And I just hugged him. And we just stood there and hugged, and we both just cried.
Yeah.
And that's what we did for, again, what felt like forever. We just stood there, hugged each other, and cried.
What happened next for you guys? Because obviously, I mean, this is no mystery in the story, right? He was in a toxic relationship. Things were going on there. The last time you saw him, he goes off with the girlfriend. Something obviously transpired in that time, right? I mean, that is factual. We know that. Only he and her will ever know really what happened during that time. And that's so sad. And there's so many elements of, there's, signs of toxic relationship, things going on there, which is kind of interesting because there's a couple of those stories this season. So, we're giving you guys a lot of signs here. Like, if you see these things, like, these are things to talk about. But tell us, and then I want to kind of tell us what happened next. And, like, did you guys have a funeral? Like, how was that for you? And then I'd love if you could kind of close us out a little bit, Taylor, with your story, and just tell us how you feel now about those signs. So if you could tell us about the funeral, days after, in your process, and then kind of tell us, looking back now on those signs and looking back on what like, what is some advice you can give people, right? Because suicide is just, it's like fentanyl, it's like drugs, it's like this, it's I feel like it's an epidemic, and it's something we're not talking about enough. And it's it's a true tragedy. It really is. So if you can walk us through those two things, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So we had a funeral. We went to the funeral home, planned it all out. My dad came into town. He lives in a different state. I had a funeral, and this is something that I do want to spend a little bit of time on. So many people showed up. I mean, the church, there were no seats left. And that's something that I do want to talk about, because I guess with depression, you don't know that you have all these people behind you. The fact that there were hardly any chairs left in the church shows that he was loved. He had friends. He had people who loved him, but he didn't know it. And so I think that could be a piece of advice right there is, if you're friends with someone, if you love someone, let them know that. And that sounds so cliche. That's something that everybody says, but it's so true, especially if you know something's going on.
People say it, but do they really live it, Taylor?
Right.
And this is an example of that. So I really love that message. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's something that's so easy to say, but so easy not to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be my advice, especially if you know something's going on, reach out to that person. How can I help you? What do you need? I love you. I'm here for you. As cliche as it sounds, it's true. So we had the funeral, lots of people came. I had taken that whole next week off of school. I had messaged all my professors like, hey, I won't be there. This is why. And every single one of them emailed me back and was like, we're praying for you during this time, because I went to a Christian school. And that just meant a lot to me. That my professors were like, take as much time as you need.
That's amazing, because not all of them are like that or have been like that in some situations that I've heard and shared. So that's amazing that you had that support. Yeah.
And I'm so glad that I did. And, and Miss Williams that I was talking about earlier, she kind of through this became my mentor. And, but all of them, they're like, we're praying for you, take the time off, let us know when you're ready to come back. I think I ended up only taking like a week off. And so the times after that, were hard, as you can imagine, as I mean, you've been through it as well. It's hard. You don't know what to say. You don't know what to do. You live in this state of numbness is the only way to describe it. And, I feel like that's one of those things, like, you don't really know what it feels like to be numb unless you are feeling numb, unless you've been there. And so I just lived in this state of numbness. And, my roommates had kind of, looking back now, I'm assuming they just didn't know what to say. But, I'm no longer friends with them because when I came back to school, it was just awkward. It was weird. And I'm assuming it's because they didn't know what to say. But sometimes you don't have to say anything, And that was a big thing for me is I don't want you to talk to me. I just want you to come sit beside me. We can sit here in silence. I don't care if it's awkward for you. Just sit here with me and be quiet.
I think that's one of the best parts of your story, like, and like a piece of advice too. And I really love that you're bringing this up, Taylor, because when your friend's mom sat down next to you, like that was such an impactful moment for you because that's all you needed. And I talk about that all the time too. I'm like, people ask me like, how can I support my friend? I'm like, literally just be with them.
Don't talk to her.
Yeah, like literally, I didn't want anyone to say anything because even if you were the nicest person in the world, I was like, how dare you say that? Or like if they were like, oh, this is so horrible, I'm like, no kidding, it's horrible. You know what I mean? Like you just can't win when you're in that state of mind. You just can't.
Yeah, you can't. And there's no words that you can say to make it feel better.
Right.
And everything you say is going to make it sound worse. Like, people are saying to me, like, not immediately, but, later on, well, at least he's not suffering. I'm like,
I knew you were going to say that. Yes.
I am.
Right.
And, it's just a cycle of things that sometimes, and, you're right, that is a piece of advice. Sometimes you just don't have to say anything.
Yep.
Just sit there with me. And that's all I wanted. And my friend Kara understood that. And Colby, he it was harder for him to understand. He's come around a lot more now.
Yeah.
At first it was harder for him to understand, but thankfully Kara, she had been through the schooling. She was human services. She had studied the psychology and things like that I was studying. And so she, I guess, knew and she understood I don't have to talk. Let's just sit here.
Yeah.
And so she was a big part of that for me. And me and her are still friends today. We talk about every other day. But yeah, I came back to school and all the girls on my hall, my what do they call it? My RA for the hall had kind of, I guess, held a meeting and let everyone know on the hall what was going on. And so everybody on the hall wrote me a note. And so I got to have that when I came back, and I had individual notes from everybody.
Yeah.
And so that was really good, to have, like, I have support. And so I had support from my friend Kara, my husband, and just these girls in my hall that I don't even know.
That's cool, though. Yeah.
It is. It was so cool. And so anyways, fast forwarding a little bit more, I was depressed, super, super depressed. I didn't go do anything. I didn't want to go do anything. My grades never suffered, thankfully. That was something that I put all my focus on was school and my grades. But as far as going out and doing things, I didn't do it. I was depressed. I slept all the time. I didn't want to do anything. And then eventually Colby was like, look, you've got to go to therapy. And I didn't want to. I was against it. I did not want to go because when you're in that state and you're so depressed, why do you want to go talk about it? You know what I mean? Like, why do you want to go talk about it? But I ended up, solely to please Colby, I went to therapy. And that's the best thing that I could have done. And, that's another piece of advice, I guess you could say, is you're probably not going to want to go, but do it. That is the best thing that I could have done. I built this awesome relationship with my therapist. And she just helped me with so much. And she helped me realize things that I would have never realized on my own. She helped me to be able to learn to talk, to learn to ask questions, because, that's just something so simple that I didn't know how to do, didn't want to do. And so she helped me learn all of these things. And, I actually haven't seen her in a couple of years. I stopped going. But I had told her at one point, I started having dreams and of people hanging. And I never saw my brother. I never saw him in that way. But I started having dreams of it, of him, of other people. And I told my therapist this, and she was like, look, you may have a little bit of PTSD. And that's another thing. People associate PTSD with military, with people that are in the military. And while that's so true and is a completely different form of PTSD that I am not claiming to have, it is also true to this situation as well. And so she's like, you may want to go talk to a doctor. You may want to be put on some medicine. Well, by this point, I had built my relationship with her. So I trusted her and I didn't question it. I was like, you know what? You're right. So I ended up getting on medicine. It took a couple dose changes to get it right, but we finally got it right. And that's not something that you have to do forever. Some people do, and that's okay. But I've been off my medicine since August of last year, 2023, and I feel great. And I'm so glad that I'm off of it. It's okay to be on it for a while. It's okay to be on it temporarily. So I did these things, I went to therapy. I got on medicine. I talked with Miss Williams a lot. She became my mentor. And, I won't say I got better because, that's always there. That's going to be a part of my life from now on. That's a part of my testimony from now on. And it's always going to be there. You don't just get better, but you learn how to cope with it. You learn how to talk about it. You learn how to be open with it. And if someone asks a question, you learn how to not get offended by that question. And you meet new people and they say, well, do you have any siblings?
Our favorite question to get, I know.
That's a question that I never knew how to answer it. I never knew how to answer it, but now I can confidently say, yes, I had a brother. He passed away in 2018. And that just opens up doors. It opens up conversation.
But you had to navigate that in your journey. Like, how do I want to answer that? What feels good for me? And I always tell people, I'm like, try on different things, and sometimes it's different. And we talked about it on the show many times. Like, sometimes it's different. Like, when you meet people, sometimes you feel safer with some people than other people. So you may find yourself responding differently. Like, sometimes I speak in present tense. Sometimes I speak in past tense. It's like, and that's okay. That's totally okay. This is your grief journey. And just like you said, therapy, I recommend therapy for everybody. I think it can be helpful for everybody. But, if you need medication, like, we have very similar stories with that, Taylor. Like I was saying, I took antidepressants for years and I've been off it for about a year now as well. And so it's like, I was on it for like 6 years. That was a long time, 5-6 years. And, some people need it longer, some people need it less, but and I also changed medications and, I still have that sneaking suspicion that I kept it like a security blanket a little bit because I really didn't need it that long. But, it did what it needed to do. And there's no shame in that at all. No shame.
You learn, like you were saying, who you can trust, who you can tell things to. And it's okay if you don't want to tell them that. I mean, thankfully, I have come to a point where I'm like, yes, I had a brother. He passed away. He actually committed suicide in 2018. Like, I guess through therapy and, realizing that the more we talk about it, the more the stigma goes down. And so I always try to sneak it in there to open up a conversation. And, it's opened up many different conversations. Some people that's what I struggled with, or I've also dealt with this, or I've never
Isn't
dealt
it
with
shocking?
that.
Like, people that you wouldn't have thought, and they're like, they tell you. I do something very similar with the homicide aspect of my brother's story, and I'm like, I used to not put that part in there, right? And then now I'm completely open about it. I'm like, yep, I lost my brother in November of 2016 to a homicide. Yep. Boom.
And that's kind of how I say it. Well,
I'm like, yep. Yeah. And it's so interesting because it also will tell you a lot about another person too. That's what I've discovered too. Because when you get to a point where you're emotionally, mentally, and physically confident, and that doesn't mean it doesn't bother you. It just means that you're in a place where you are comfortable with yourself, and their reaction is not a reflection of you, right? Their reaction is a reflection of themselves. And so being able to say that it's interesting. It's interesting to watch people's reactions, actually, from a psychological standpoint. Yeah.
Sometimes people's reactions can be a bit funny. And they're just like, whoa, you didn't have to tell me that.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
well, you asked, so
yeah,
I'm gonna tell
you asked, so you get the answer, so here you go. Yeah.
Do you want the answer?
Interesting.
So yeah, fast forwarding and all of that, I've become very open about it. I'm a stay-at-home mom now, but previously I worked in mental health. And so I learned a lot there. I've met so many people there. Actually, the CEO, his wife, me and her clicked because her brother also died by suicide.
Wow.
And so me and her clicked in that way. And so, our patients and things like that, I had a chance to say, I've been there. And that's not to reflect or glorify myself. It is not to glorify myself in any way, but it's to say, you're not alone.
Yes.
I know that you feel like you're alone, but you're not. And I know you're not because I've been there.
And ultimately, that's what we want to feel as humans. We don't want to feel like we're alone. We want to feel like we have shared experiences. And even though it feels counterintuitive sometimes when you lose a sibling in such a tragic way like suicide, because you're like, I don't want anybody to have gone through this. Like, I don't want anybody to experience it. But it's our nature as humans to want to connect in a level of, I've been through that too. So it's an interesting dance that we do with that.
Yeah. And so, I've said, since then, I want to share my brother's story. I want to, like I said, bring the stigma down. The more we talk about it, the more we can bring that stigma down, the more people are going to go get help that they deserve to have. And so any chance I get, I try to talk about it. I went to school for human services. I worked in mental health for almost 3 years. I got my mental health first aid certification. I just went all out. I was like, I want to help these people as much as I can. And so that's what I did. And I'm so proud of that. And I think my brother would be so proud of that as well. And then, so to fast forward a little bit more, just a little tidbit I wanted to throw in there. My husband and I, we got married. We have a little boy now, and he is named after my brother.
I love that. I felt like that's where you were going with that. I love that. Oh, so his name is Blake. Yeah.
Oh, his middle name is Blake.
Oh, I love that. My youngest sister named her son middle name after my brother Andreas. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
It's really cute. It's really special.
It's very special. And it was an obvious choice. Like, when we found out we were having a boy, we immediately was like, his middle name's going to be Blake. And my husband was like, yep, I like it. It was just on board. Like,
we had a very similar conversation. Yeah, it's really cute. Yeah.
Question about it. It's perfect. Fits him. It fits him. It's a way to remember and honor my brother, and for my baby to ask questions and to know who his uncle was, even though he's never going to meet him. And so it's a good conversation starter as well. When I tell people his name and they know my brother, like, he's named after your brother. And I'm like, yes, he is. So it's very special.
I love that. And thanks for sharing that, Taylor, because a lot of people ask that, like when I'm on lives or like in support groups and stuff, they're like, is it okay to do this? Is this weird? I think it's great, and you need to do what's comfortable. Like some people will have it as a first name or a middle name or a nickname or something like that. I think you have to do what feels right. And I love that you and your husband were just like, feels right. It feels good. And like, so I think that's going to answer a lot of people's questions. One thing I want to point out before we close out and talk about where people can find you, Taylor, if they want to connect with you. One thing we talked about this before we hit record, so I have to bring this up. Your brother died on August, which is 18th of year 2018. Your brother's, I didn't know this till we hit record, but your brother was the number 8.
Oh my gosh, yes.
On his jersey. And then you were telling me he also had an infinity tattoo. So I've really been into numerology lately. I think there's something there with that. But this is really one of those moments where I kind of got chills when you told me his jersey was 8 and then the 8, 18, 18. I was like, and then the tattoo. So I think that's, there's just eerie things in a lot of stories. But also I think, I hate that your brother struggled so much with mental health, but like, what an interesting connection. I don't know what that means, but maybe someone that's a medium or something will listen to this and go, or into numerology and be like, it means this. So who knows? I had to point that out though, because I made that connection as we were talking about this story and your brother. So there was something with the number 8 with him for sure.
And we were talking about that. And then I did mention his jersey, but when I mentioned his jersey, it never clicked that we had just had that conversation. Yeah.
Very interesting. Taylor, thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And I know your faith has been a part of your journey too. And, sometimes people will talk about that with me too. They'll say, I lost faith. I did too. And then I kind of came back to faith, and, my relationship with God is really good these days. And, I think you and I have that in common as well. And I think that's a part of the evolution too. But tell people where they can connect with you if they want to have a conversation, because again, losing a sibling by suicide is not talked about enough. Like, it's just not in general. So are you a TikToker, Facebook, Instagram? Where are you comfortable people connecting with you?
Yeah, so I am very active on Facebook. I don't have Instagram or TikTok or anything like that, but Facebook is where I'm at. I'm very active on there. I post a lot about mental health and suicide.
Awesome.
On there as well, for awareness. And there's also that group. I actually think that's where me and you connected at first, was that group. It's Parents and Families of Homicide and Suicide Victims is what it's called. It's a Facebook group, and I'm actually one of the admins for that group.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, awesome. Okay. Yeah, perfect. And you're in our group too, of course. Yeah, the Surviving Siblings podcast group, yes. I believe. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we'll make sure that we put your Facebook link in there, and we'll put both of the groups in there too, because I love being a part of that group as well. Awesome. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing Blake's story. I know this is going to help so many siblings, so thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.